Studio Ghibli is seen as the premier and most famous animation studio in Japan. The studio started in 1985, founded in part by the famed animator and storyteller Hayao Miyazaki. The studio is most well known for its breathtaking visuals and moving, expansive stories of adventure, compassion, and discovery. The legacy of Studio Ghibli is considerable. Movies like Howl's Moving Castle, Ponyo, and Spirited Away have taught the world about love, courage, and sacrifice, while successfully crossing cultural divides, making anime a household name in many places across the world. It isn't hard to understand why Studio Ghibli has lasted for so many decades, but in recent years there has been a considerable slow in the production of their animated movies. Studio Ghibli's most recent feature-length production, Earwig and the Witch, was produced in 2020, after a stretch of 6 years where the studio didn't come out with any new feature-length productions aside from an animated short called Boro the Caterpillar in 2018. There are a number of reasons why production in the Ghibli studio may have stalled at different points over the past decade, related in part to changes in leadership or the typical delays associated with any production. But their absence in Japan's anime landscape over the past 10 years has led other studios to fill the void that they left. Kyoto Animation has risen to become one of the most popular studios in Japan, and as of 2021, Ufotable's production of Demon Slayer Mugen Train has surpassed Spirited Away as the highest grossing anime film in history. This leads us to the question, is Studio Ghibli still relevant? Now, this isn't a question of whether or not Studio Ghibli can make a good movie. Of course they can, and sure enough, many people will like whatever they release next. Their next film, How Do You Live?, coming from the mind of Hayao Miyazaki, is in production and will undoubtedly have a warm reception. This question about Studio Ghibli's relevancy has more to do with who we are as consumers in a global marketplace, and even Japanese consumers. Now, Ghibli's last full-length film, 2020's Earwig and the Witch, was stylistically a Studio Ghibli film. Of that, there can be no doubt. But the writing, the animation, and the characters were all subpar by a number of measures. Some have even called it a bad movie. So the reality is that it's been since 2014 that the world has enjoyed a good Studio Ghibli movie. And in that time, the world has changed. What can certainly be said of the Zeitgeist in 2014 versus present day is that it has shifted. For Japan, Studio Ghibli no longer represents the best in modern anime filmmaking and storytelling. Since then, Japan has enjoyed numerous groundbreaking anime that have left audiences in awe. Subsequently, Japan has released Your Name, A Silent Voice, Words Bubble Up Like Soda Pop, and Violet Evergarden, all of which have received heavy critical praise for their storytelling and animation. Not to mention, many shonen and other anime are pushing the boundaries of the types of animation that audiences can expect from them. Even for the wholesome and whimsical fare that Studio Ghibli is known for, many studios, like the animators behind the Pokemon shorts and even Made in Abyss, are successfully replicating the breathtaking fantasy that one might expect from Studio Ghibli. From a Western perspective, there used to be a time, possibly around 2014, when Studio Ghibli was one of the few studios that had official dubs for full-length movies in other languages. But now, with the advent of streaming services, not only have Western audiences been allowed to enjoy foreign animation in their native tongues, but they've also been exposed to many different anime film experiences that were prior to a rarity in broad markets. So in terms of availability, the place that Studio Ghibli left during their hiatus has essentially been filled by progress. Furthermore, not only has technology and animation progressed, but cultural appeal has changed as well. Mainstream Western audiences circa 2020 are uniquely concerned with the representation of diverse groups in storytelling, Western producers have graced the world with a number of quality, high-performing programs that meet this desire, and although Western animated shows haven't been able to cultivate the level of quality that has been produced in live action, much of their anime-inspired attempts could be described as hackneyed. Anime, in some ways, has evolved to meet Western audiences where they are. Many look to anime to produce the type of animation that Western animators won't. High action, human stories, realistic and authentic depictions. Yet current audiences are looking for these stories through the eyes of diverse peoples. Over the past decade, these stories are more visible than ever in anime. Carol and Tuesday, the first critically acclaimed anime starring a black character, was released in 2019, and many other diverse characters and people of color have been elevated in anime in recent years, a la Precure, Fire Force, Pokemon, and the Shaman King reboot. It is this cultural virtue that hasn't ever had a place in Studio Ghibli productions. Studio Ghibli was founded in 1985, a time when Japan, which is a generally homogenous country, was even more so. A time when outside of East Asia, Japan's primary cultural relationships were with Eastern Europe. This is evident in Studio Ghibli's storytelling. Their films rely heavily on cultural nostalgia and tradition. They call back to a time when countries were racially and culturally uniform. Of the roughly 24 films that Studio Ghibli has produced, every one of them has centered either traditional Japanese culture or Eastern European locales culture or influences. In the same time, Studio Ghibli has not produced a single named character with brown skin. In fact, anyone would be hard-pressed to find 3 background characters with brown skin in a Studio Ghibli movie, because the reality is they probably don't exist. In the late 2000s and early 2010s, Studio Ghibli was often compared to Disney Pixar as an Eastern counterpart, and it's possible that at the time this was true. However, what made Pixar succeed even today where Ghibli failed has nothing to do with animation, but more to do with a willingness to tell unique, oddly specific stories, cultural stories that maintain the integrity of Pixar's flair for the imaginative and heartfelt. A story about Italian sea monsters, best friends, which was essentially a shonen coming-of-age narrative, a Day of the Dead style Spirited Away story about a Mexican boy and his guitar, an Afro-American jazz musician dies and tries to live again. These are just some of the diverse stories Pixar has told. Yet with Ghibli, you pretty much know what you're going to get every time. Japanese history, Euro-Japanese fantasy, or European history. Now, does this mean that there isn't any room for Studio Ghibli today? It doesn't. With or without the direction of Miyazaki, surely Studio Ghibli can and will produce more good movies, but at this point it isn't reasonable to believe that people are waiting on bated breath for their next film when today the landscape of anime movies is so rich in Japan. Whether Ghibli will produce another Spirited Away isn't the question. Their relevancy is based on their ability to adapt not to the whims of their audiences, but to their ever-expanding imaginations that yearn for the same powerful writing and glorious visuals, but with new stories, with new peoples, and new places. Until this occurs, until they rejoin the modern anime ecosystem, audiences may just find Studio Ghibli to be irrelevant.